And we're live. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Tim. Good to see you there. We're just getting ready to start. We're going to start in about 5 minutes' time. John, just before we start, I'll get you to adjust your mic down about a centimetre. We're just getting a little noise from your mic, from your.
How's that?
That's good. Probably half the distance, and we'll be right.
Is that okay?
So that's good. That's perfect. How's the weather in Lismore, Tim? We're getting a chilly winter over here. And we'll be recording tonight. We'll leave the recording up for a couple of days, but we will be taking them down and actually assembling them together in a package after the end of the series. So very cold in Lismore too. I see snow in Melbourne, not Melbourne, but my how do you say it? My son-in-law's parents, who lives in the mountains behind Melbourne, they were having snow falling yesterday. Not quite reaching the ground, but very pretty. So we're just giving people a little bit of time to get organised, to come on. We really excited to be doing this presentation over the next few weeks. And yes, Tim, I read some smart aleck comment the other day that said Australians were surprised yet again by the cold snap for the 200th time in a row, or 200th year in a row. I think you're right. We get used to the cold, the warm, and we enjoy it and expect it to stay that way. But in Adelaide here, it's also our wet time of the year, so we need it very much. Not like you lucky guys that have rain all year round. So we're on 6:58 Adelaide time. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. So just while we're waiting for another minute, a few more people have come on. Dave and Maggie, hi. Hi, Carol. And we're just about ready to go. And chilly in Sydney as well. Okay, the clock has just clicked 7, so 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Kuku Yaral, and thanks for staying in on this chilly night around Australia. It's good to see you all here. We're beginning a new series entitled "The Fires of the Ancestors Are Burning." This comes from a presentation that John Hartley has been doing around the country for many years, and as I said in the notes that went out to you, that it's been done in all kinds of forms, from day workshops through to 10-day residentials. So it's a powerful presentation that we're doing over 6 nights, and welcome aboard. We're really pleased to have you here. If you have any comments, we welcome them, and questions, put them in the box. We're going to have a conversation with John in a moment, and but just as a matter of housekeeping, we'll come to questions and comments at the end. So feel free to put them in any time, and we'd like to have a bit of a discussion later on. Okay. So, John, are you there? Hello, John.
Yes. Hello.
Good evening. How are you?
Good. I'm well. Yourself?
Good, thanks.
That's good. Yala da jawan ngayo yalan di bama ngayo bode garajal ngayo bonanda Ghana bubungo. Welcome to all my friends and all the people tuned in tonight. My name's John Hartley, and I'm sitting and living in Ghana country, and now often now referred to as Adelaide, South Australia.
So, John, we're beginning this new series, "The Fires of the Ancestors Are Burning," and it's based on the storyboards. I'd like to ask you about the boards before we move into the formal section. How did the boards come about, John?
Oh, well, that's a reasonably long story. It was I was looking for a way to be able to address violence in its broader context. That is family violence, and in the context of colonial violence. After much thought, I began to work on these, develop the concept of having a series of storyboards which are separate, but at some point all come together, because I remember, I think it was John Howard stating very clearly that everything in relation to Aboriginal people was in the past, and it had no relevance or connection to the future, which is, completely opposite, really, to Aboriginal worldview. Of course, Aboriginal worldview, we think everything is connected and interdependent, and so I based the storyboards on that. And they're a multi-layered presentation that essentially look at colonization, the impacts and effects, but also beginning the process of decolonization. As I said, the concept, the storyline, the symbolism was about 1994, I guess, come up with it. And I wanted cultural tools. What were those cultural tools that we always use? And that was, of course, song, artwork, dance, storytelling. So I tried to put all those kinds of things together. And after having developed the concept and the storyline, I then asked a good friend and family friend, a Jaja Wurang artist of the Gula Nation by the name of Sue Charles Rankin, if she would if she would paint the story, which graciously she did. And I think, you know, I mean, the storyboards are really, they're not about allotting blame, really. I mean, I look at them as being about accountability and responsibility, really, and trying to encourage, hopefully, people to take self-responsibility in bringing about change within First Nations communities. And I guess the objective of the storyboards was to show the direct links between colonial violence and family violence and the breakdown of cultural values, beliefs, and practices. And also the sophistication of Bama society and way of life, the subversive aspects of colonisation process, that Bama cultural values, beliefs, and practices remains a continuing, living, breathing way of life, and not something relegated to a long ago past or a lineal period of time that rest in the past. And I guess finishing that up, it was also about centering Aboriginal culture in our continued advocacy for a sovereign treaty.
Right. So I just meant to mention and meant to ask you whether everyone out there was able to get the download, the called Inhabitants. Can you just put a yes or a no in the chat box to let me know if you're able to have a look at that, and if you've been able to have download it and have a look at that. Just curious to see if everyone is getting that information. So we put that out a couple of times and again today, but just checking to see how well our communications are. I have to remember here that we're on about a 20-second delay, so I'll just give you a little moment for those replies to come through. So Timothy has. Thanks, Timothy. And Dave and Maggie as well. Thanks, Trish. Absolutely. We're going to put those aside now, but I thought it would be useful to use that as a starting point. We're going to put them aside now until later on, but it sort of is a reset of of the mindset that has been operating here in Australia for a long time. So I'll just let John have a sip of his cup of tea and hand it over to him to begin the presentation. So I'll hand it over to you now, John, and just bring up the first of the boards. Here we are. And I'll put that up for everyone to see.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone should be able to see that now. If you can't see the first of the boards, the painting, it's called the heart. If you can't see that, just put that. Let me know in the chat box there, please, or just say okay if you can see that. Okay. I think we're right, John, and I'll hand the mic over to you.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I just got to check here that everyone is going to be able to hear you okay. I think they can. Just give me going to hand it over to John now. It's because I'm sending the picture from a different place.
Hello, testing 1 2. Test. Can't see. Felicity says can't see. Dave and Maggie say, not yet. Timothy, not yet. No, can't see it yet. I see John in his room with the painting in the background. Okay.
I've just made an adjustment there, and okay, I think we're right, John.
Got it. There it is. Okay. So I should not be on screen anymore. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Our law, obligations, responsibilities, our interaction, and how we relate to our country and one another, our values, our beliefs and practices, our worldview, all arise and is governed by our Mujaguramun, which some people would call dreaming. As handed through the generation, our law still continues to this very day. The center of the board is a fire, and the biggest circle surrounding the fire is our country, or Bubu, where we belong. We see our elders and the connecting lines into their country, representing the birth from and their return into their Bubu, into their country. The dots and the water droplets in the continuing cycle represent our law, LAW, regeneration, changing seasons and continuing way of life, and our Mujaguru Mun, our dreaming. From the top right, we see our family and kinship gatherings. Coming down the screen on the right-hand side is the male side, the grandfather, father, uncle, brother, brother-in-laws, nephews, and sons. Continuing around the board, we see the bush and the seafoods and the medicines. We see the sun representing our spirituality. We see the female side, grandmothers, mothers, aunties, sisters, sister-in-laws, nieces, daughters. Top left of painting depicts ceremonial gatherings, and the many smaller dots represents the stars of the night sky. When the Kuku Yaral Bama first moved to Manjaldimbi area, they knew nothing about what was good to eat and what was poison. One day, a man whose body shone like lightning appeared in front of the elders. He instructed them what was good food and how to process some of the bad foods to make them good to eat. This ancestor also instructed the people in Bama law so they could live a good, healthy life. He taught them what was sacred, what is taboo, what is dangerous, what is good, how to read the stars, where they could hunt in both land and in water country, medicinal, health and scientific properties of plants and various foods. He also instructed Bama in marriage and kinship relationships, how to perform and carry out ceremonial obligations, how to care for each other, country, and all things within it. In Bama way, all things have a meaning. The people live in accordance with the seasons. The spiritual and physical are unified, and the laws of nature are emphasized. Society is based on cultural pluralism and the extended family. Ancestral roots are remembered, and learning is through doing, or experientialism. Teachings are passed through the generations through the song lines by appropriate custodians and holders of song and law. Kinship and spiritual life is based on cultural renewal. Technology serves the people and nature. Material wealth is shared and given away. Behavior is cooperative and in accordance with Bama law, and both justice and equality are achieved through cultural forms and communal consent in accordance with our Ngurjagura. Our society is egalitarian, and men and women have equal freedoms, and leaders put the people above themselves, and the balance with nature is constantly maintained. The value system, makeup and social organisation and control of Aboriginal societies pre-1788 remain sophisticated, complex, complete and functional. Now the ancestor who came to teach Bama law was named Gubidi, and after a while he went away and was not seen again. But before leaving, Gubidi cautioned Bama to remain by the fire and keep their culture strong.
Okay, that brings to mind, John. I'll just put this camera back on. I've told you this story before, but I think others may be interested. In 2000, the year 2000, was really the first time that I'd been into an Aboriginal community. And I had the opportunity, I was teaching school in Newcastle at the time, and a friend was working in the health clinic out at Kintore, about northwest of Alice Springs, just on the West Australian border. And I got to fly out there. It was the school holidays. It had been a very wet season out there. There was lots of bush tucker. In fact, the bush tomatoes were growing everywhere, and they were starting to ripen up. I got off the plane. There was no one there to collect me, so I started to just make my way into the community. And all the kids were playing, and it struck me, how different things were operating there, that they would pick a bush tomato, have a bite, throw it away, and they'd be on their bikes and riding around. And a lot of the girls were playing games in the dirt, in the sand, drawing pictures. And I knew enough to know that they were playing marriage partner games based on the skin system of the Pintabee people up there. And of course, everything was in language, and they would ask me my name, and I'd say my name, and they would hear my name and repeat it, and then they'd say, "What's your name?" And I couldn't really work out until someone told me quite some time later that, they were asking you your skin name. But the biggest thing of that first trip, I spent about a week or so out there, was the shock that I hadn't known before that this culture was still alive and thriving in Australia. Where I had come from, it was something that was long ago. Many years later, I come to find out that actually it's also still going in the cities too, but you have to know how to look to see it. But it was the shock of finding out, that Australia wasn't the white Anglo place that I had thought it was, and that this rich ancient culture was, alive and well and being practiced, and English wasn't spoken up there. Even the kids could speak, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 languages. The older people would speak 5 languages, and very little English. And of course, I learned a lot more of that as I met you later on, John, and we were working on the documentaries and travelling, through the centre and up through your country as well. And it struck me just how what an anomaly it is that we don't know about the country that we live in. And I guess that's really the starting point, in a way, that you're talking about with this, the heart, the painting of the heart. Would that be right?
Yeah, it's the heart, from where we come. You muck around with the actual word, it can turn into earth, or add another letter, it can turn into hearth. And so all those, I thought the heart struck at, from where, well, it's where we live, really, in that space. Yeah, and we had to we in you know we see colonization, which is about denial, which is about assimilation, um, um, of Aboriginal peoples, but the decolonisation process is about the reclaiming of who you are as a First Nations person in this country, and trying to wade daily through these through the dominant story that Aboriginal people are heathens, that they're backward, that they're no longer here. Very, very hard stuff to wade through on a daily basis. And that's if we look at the handout that people have read in relation to the inhabitants. That was an observation by William Dampier. I think it was in 1699, and so 70 years before Cook came along the eastern seaboard, and maybe 100 years before Philip came across the way into our country. And we can see, and Dampier at the time was a very widely distributed author throughout Europe. So
yes,
the racist profiling of Bama, of First Nations people of this country, was happening, 100 years before prior to 1788. So and that thinking has imbued the mindset of invading and occupying forces and colonial settlers pretty much to the current day, in my observation. Yeah. And
well,
so
yes,
so the storyboards are
it's
pointing out the sophistication of Bummer lifeways. When to be able to live in this country with some hunting implements, making your fire as you go, being able to prepare foods that are poisonous, that would kill you if you ate them, but then knowing how you prepare that food to make it edible, to be able to take various compounds from nature, to mix them into one, and to come up with a substance that will keep you hydrated and assist you in walking across vast amounts of dry country or hilly country. It amazes me how these compounds are come about, and the sophistication of the language networks, the kinship relationships, are just mind-blowing. Language, we're talking at this time, something like 600 languages, not dialects, but languages, full, that went out like a net over the country. And so it's, I guess the first board is a little bit about trying to create a conversation and sharing that, and trying to break that mindset of terra nullius. Yeah.
I think there's one more thing perhaps you could comment on, John. It was another big revelation for me as a white fella. We have this idea that there's all these clan groups with separate languages, and thinking of it as a different language being a way of separating people in a way. So there are all these little mobs that are, quite insular, and without much connection with their neighbours or anyone further afield. But that's actually not so. In fact, Aboriginal groups have always travelled, through country, even though they would have their own, particular dreaming sites and so on that would always come back to. But the unity through the stories happened on levels beyond language, and in fact, people spoke many languages, and having different languages was a way of knowing who each other were and where you come from, and was another meta level way of communicating, if you like, rather than being a way of dividing people. Can you tell us something about that?
Oh, look.
About the stories that crisscross the country.
Look, when you're looking at what they refer to as song lines, they're held by many different family groups across the whole continent. It's like an interwoven, interdependent web of songs and storylines that spread right out, and you can go through one area to another area, and people that have never ever visited what we would say a neighboring country or a far off country could go into that particular country knowing the laws of that country, but also knowing where they can obtain foods, water, where they can go and can't go, through having learned the song lines. But those song lines, they were held by family groups right throughout the entirety of the continent, and the law itself spread throughout the country, yeah, and it was went from rockhole to rockhole, and we are all related in some way as brothers and sisters throughout the entirety of this continent. Everybody had their responsibility, of course, within their homelands, and to maintain their law and sites, sacred sites, and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was struck by this when we went up to your country and to the west of Mossman there the first time with the old fellow from the desert, and was talking about the Gubadi that you referred to before.
Yes.
And is it right that it's also referred to as grandfather in some contexts?
Yeah, you could in a real sense. Yeah, you could call that.
Yeah, and
refer to that as a grandfather. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And he was saying, "Oh, we've got the same in the APY lands." He says that one's in Armada, and was laying out a template, as it were, of the relationship of the country to the layout of the land, and how it's intertwined with family, kinship, story, all part of the same whole, if you like. And it struck me that this is something that must exist right across Australia. If someone who has not visited that country from the central desert area can come to a rainforest area and then into an open savanna country and interpret that country in the same way, there's something going on here in a way of understanding country, a way of knowing and being that is actually escapes Western worldview entirely. And there's the fact that we in Western worldview have put logic and reason as the highest aspiration, the lens through which we see the world is a very limiting and narrow view. And one of the things that I'm totally absorbed by is the way that in the desert regions where I've spent most time, is that things operate with intuition as the way that people mostly interpret, the primary way of interpreting the world. And having intuition developed to a highly refined degree allows you to go hunting or looking for bush tucker and water and having a connection with country in a way that simply isn't possible if you're doing it logically. It's too, or rationally, it's absolutely too complex, to actually have maps and lists and, all this thing if you're doing it linearly and logically, as opposed to having, a deep relationship with the country where your knowing of it is more or less immediate. You can certainly go and check it out, but it's a different relationship to country, and it's not one of ownership, but one of deep relationship, I suppose.
Well, it's a deep relationship that comes, of course, it's handed down through the stories and the songs, but it's it is a relationship. It's a custodianship of all those kinds of things. But and I'm being political now because it's also we need to start referring to it as an ownership in a political sense, because I think it's the trend today is to acknowledge custodians of country. But where we want to get to is you need to recognize in using those words such as custodian and things like that. Yes, the idea of ownership in Aboriginal families is not well, it wasn't evident, but it's an easy way now for politics and those who want to continue to deny Aboriginal people's sovereignty within our own country. Yeah, so I think there needs to be a lot of thought around those kind of things when we're using certain words, because they're being used as well. You're a custodian. You don't really own anything like we do in the West. It's that, yeah, because it's a world of difference in how we look at that and how we relate. Our country is no different from our body. It's part of your body, and when you have when country is taken from you, stolen from you, you're connected to that country like a taproot. And when that happens, it's like pulling, if you've ever pulled a taproot, it pulls at your belly, at your guts. And it's like pulling out a taproot. It's not a nice feeling. Yeah, so that connection is there absolutely, but in a political sense, we need to start looking at things a little bit different. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a need to be having. Well, the Western way is saying, well, since invasion, it's been either you're this way or that way, isn't it? You say, if you're dark enough, you can continue to be Aboriginal. If you've got some white in you, well, then you have to come across and you have to change your culture and let all that go. I mean, that was actually legislated, um, and yet that has to be a recipe for disaster. I mean, what I hear the old people saying all over the country is about there being two ways, and we actually already have in certain places traditional law having been recognised as existing prior to um, common law. Not that it's acted upon, but there have been a couple of court cases where that recognition has been made. In fact, back as far as 1992, I think, is sort of the landmark cases that we actually haven't really heard about. But it is saying that these two ways of being, and it isn't just a matter of law, it's a matter of the ways of knowing and being and living and worldview can live side by side. The courts have tested this, and they're saying that can be, and in fact they're saying that should be. And the cases went to describe in some detail where it was necessary that would happen. And it hasn't happened, but we're still unaware that those things have taken place, and that is actually an aspiration that we could work towards. And it seems to me that has been excluded from the conversation of reconciliation and all these other things. It's as if there's only one way, and it's a very condescending and patriarchal sort of attitude coming from the mainstream, rather than recognising the complementary nature of the relationship that's here.
Yeah, and it is, many people in this country know what's going on, and they have a good understanding today of First Nations people, and they also understand, that our people have not been given a fair shake. Yeah.
Well, that's the challenge to bring.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing.
Yes.
The attempts to colonize and assimilate First Nation people continues, but equally so does our collective resistance to it. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So it's I'm thinking that these things need to be. It's not that this is new information. This is old information. Really, it's just that it hasn't been commonly known or accepted. John, I'd just like to go to the chat box now. Trish has asked about, and I guess she's referring to the painting behind you. She says, "Can you explain the symbolism of the snake?"
Well, that's it has a few different names, but a generic name in Yalanji Gugu, that's we call it Guriala, and Guriala is related to the creation stories in our countries, the waterways, the valleys, some ceremonies, and he travelled throughout our country, stopping at various places along the way, creating, as I said, waterways, drinking water holes, and things. And it's also related to, you know, the clouds and the water, and it's regenerative. Yeah, it's a regenerative cycle of things. You have clouds, condensation, water comes down into the earth, nurtures the earth, regenerates the earth, and then again rises back up again, and that cycle continues. So we see that Guriella is, and you see on the painting there that the shapes are like clouds, and the circles, of course, are particular areas where Guriella travelled through the country. He not only went on the top of country, but he also went beneath the country, popping out in various places from time to time. This story, people would call it like a rainbow serpent story. Now, that's a story that runs pretty much over the entirety of the continent, and is held. You know, the story varies according to, you know, place to place, but essentially it is the same. And I think I painted that maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And it was used, if you, the Two Brothers Walking documentary really is a story pretty much about the rainbow serpent. And as we travelled with the Pitjantjatjara, Western Pitjantjatjara would call it Wannabe, so it has different names in different countries, and some different stories, but always related to water, yeah, and regeneration or reproduction in some way, shape, or form. So does that answer the question, Trish?
Yes, my mistake, Trish. Trish actually referring to the snake on the storyboard there, John. I'll just flick that up again for everyone to see. Let me see. Here we go.
Well, I can't give away too much because all will become clear. we have a long way to go.
So we're at the beginning. Hang on, sorry, I haven't showed that to everyone. Yeah, Trish is talking about this one here, and yes, you'll need to come back to hear the full story. We're sort of a sixth of the way through. Yeah. John, I just want to tell people a little bit. You're talking about Wannabe, and Two Brothers Walking the documentary. When I finished the edit, I took it up to the elders. I think you were up there. There was a meeting happening at Umuwa, and it just was fortuitous that everyone was there. And we showed it in the tin shed there, and you know, people cried when they saw it. But coming home, it's quite a long drive back to Adelaide from Freegon. It's about 14 hours drive, and Murray and Gungy, George and some kids were in the car, and I'd been driving quite a while, and I said to Murray, "Oh, you take over. It's for an hour or two. I'll have a bit of a rest, and then drive again." It was late in the afternoon in the autumn, and we were coming over that flat country between Kubapidi and Pimba, the Cook of the Plain, I call it, and very flat. It's actually quite elevated, but no mountains in the distance, and so the sky is absolutely huge, and there was storm clouds and all around the horizon, and I could see about 20 storm clouds and rain falling at different different places as we were traveling south, and there was that golden sunlight in the background. It was just magic, and it's a misty. As I understand it, Wannabe's also associated with moisture and fertility and that sort of misty weather, that drifts across country. We actually don't see it in the city, but when you get out in the flat country, you do. You see the mist rising and falling and drifting.
Become like cloud.
And rainbows.
Yeah.
That's right. And rainbows forming and disappearing and reforming and all around. And so it was just on nightfall as we were driving south, and as always happens when you're travelling with Ngunnawal and other Aboriginal groups, they'll start singing. So it was first of all just hymns, a number of hymns in Pitjantjatjara, and they were very familiar to me, of course, having had a religious upbringing when I was young. And then as night fell, I was singing Silent Night, and I was just gripped by the feeling of not just the people but the country. And I put it down to Wannabe as well from the stories that I've heard, and I quietly wept with this deep sense of loving embrace that I felt connected with that country on that time. And to me, that's what Rainbow Serpent is all about. That absolutely, phenomenal sense of connection to the fertility, the fecundity, the creativity of the country that as the terms often put in English as standing up alive. That vibrancy that you feel in country, and you see it in the desert very easily after rain. You can just feel it's palpable, the energy that's coming through.
Yeah. That's goes everywhere. Yeah, that story, and and the old people say that if it doesn't matter who you are, if you are born in this country, then you are born out of this story. You're born out of this. You're born, or the Pinjama. You're born out of that Jukupa. You're born out of that. And I say this with reservation. You're born out of that dreaming. Yeah. You're born out of that, and it belongs to you as you belong to it, and the richness and diversity of the cultures, of the languages, belong to you. That's part of everybody's heritage, and our part of everyone's responsibility to protect, revitalize, regenerate, renew, and continue it on for your children and your grandchildren and their children and grandchildren and so on and so forth. I was just thinking, and we're going back into this network of song lines and stories and connections, this interdependent web. It's quite a fragile web because you impact forcibly or adversely in one aspect. It has domino effects that reverberate throughout the entirety of the country, because maintaining law and in the country is a responsibility that can't be done by just one person. It's done by many people. And and as the old people traveled through the country, they done that through sharing with each other, and through the sharing of food, through the sharing of implements, and that in an English way, you would say, "I give to you, and you return to me." And that, in fact, as I look at it, is the very first economy of this country, was about caring and sharing, and that's how you could travel throughout this country, because of that fundamental economy of caring and sharing. Yeah? That I give to you and you give to me. Yeah, and maintaining that balance.
That's right, and understanding that that's actually the way it has to be. That we can't do anything on our own, really. We get caught in that sort of Western way of thinking sometimes, of thinking it's how much you can achieve on your own, and sort of can get very competitive about that. But ultimately, we're social creatures, not just by habit, but by necessity as well. John, I want to just refer to Trisha's earlier question here, where she says, John, as part of my work, I often acknowledge Aboriginal people as the original owners of the land on which we meet. Can you suggest some language to use that is respectful and recognises Aboriginal people, not just as custodians?
I think if you share it from your heart, I'm sure the words would come out good, Trish. Yeah, and if I'm in another country, I'm usually talking in a generic sense. I always refer to myself as sitting in, or sitting on, or living in Ghana country, and I think I would need to think about it, Trish. But I think if you just spoke it from your heart, I'm sure something good would come. Yeah. And I'm sure acknowledging people as owners. That's owners and custodians, and I think that's good.
Often I've heard those introductions or welcome to country, particularly by whitefellas, where they speak in the past tense as if it's something that that is finished. And I understand where that comes from, because I thought that way myself until I was, privileged to have that contact and to be invited in and welcomed in and experience something of a different worldview. And to me, that's the important thing, along with recognising, the first law and culture of the country is also to acknowledge that we are part of that. As you were saying before, John, that old man in the desert, he says, if you were born in Australia, you're born under this chukupa. You're under the chukupa of the country. So chukupa is a Pinjara word for like law or stories. It's actually, we don't have an English equivalent, but it's the everything of that, from the spiritual understandings through to the daily practice. And he says, well, if you're born here, you're part of that. It's not a choice; it's a fact. And he says, even if you don't know it, that doesn't make any difference. You still belong here. You're born under the life force, the energy that is generated by this land. The food you eat, the air you breathe. And he says that you should learn about it, because that's who you are too. And he's saying, even if you don't know, that doesn't change anything. But if you do want to know, he's saying, well, there's still people here who can help you learn about that and
Mm.
about who you really are.
Mm.
And that's sort of pushing the edge of it a little bit. But I believe the place where we need to be able to get to as people living in Australia to fully own um, our many our many places of origin. So in my case, I'm third generation Australia with forebears from Germany. Um, but my life force doesn't come from Germany. It comes from this country here.
Mm.
Particularly the Darling Downs where I grew up, and other places I've lived, and certainly a connection to the Central Desert areas.
Mm.
And I think for me that's one of the things is to as you say often, John, to sit down in country and to listen and to feel your connection with it, and to honour that as something real and intrinsic to our being, rather than a holiday or something trivial or something nice to do. It's more than that. It's actually something that gives us life and strength
Mm.
and being.
Well,
And
um, if it didn't, it wouldn't be what Bamako Mujuguramon. It wouldn't be what the Pinjara called Trukuba. It's that simple.
mm,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
and we don't really have an equivalent in English.
yeah.
So it's good to use some of those words, particularly if we know the words that belong to that country.
Mm. Yeah.
Felicity is just commented here. Some of the best acknowledgements of country I've heard have given specifics of the people whose land we are meeting on. It always comes across as much more heartfelt.
Mm. Mm.
And Carol says the spirit of this country is such a generous spirit that in many ways it holds the answers to the mental health and isolation issues so many Australians experiencing. It was such a shock. It was such a shock for those early, Europeans who come to Australia, and they didn't know what happened. They were expecting something familiar, and perhaps they did by calling, some places, New South Wales. I mean, in the right season, you can see the resemblance. But it's a different country altogether, different geology, different flora and fauna, different animals, and
Yeah. Well,
it takes some courage to put away, the where you come from,
mm.
so that you can see where you are with fresh, open eyes. That's still happening, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like we in the heart presentation. Everything, everything, everything in the Bummer worldview has a meaning. Yeah. Um, Throughout the entirety of this country, there's no place left untouched uh, uh, or that remains distant from the footprints of our ancestors. And every place in it has a story. It has a meaning. Our law, our social organisation was already here.
Hmm. Well, I think that's a good place to start to wind things up, John. I want to just ask everyone if you would mind putting in the chat box just one word that would describe how you would describe the social organisation and worldview of Aboriginal people and society prior to invasion, prior to colonisation. One word, just a thought to just a word that might sort of um, you know, consolidate your ideas about how you would describe the social organisation prior to invasion and colonisation.
And the worldview of Aboriginal people, yeah.
Timothy says it's important that we of European descent recognise we are part of the environment as opposed to the concept of being in but separate. Absolutely, Timothy. And, you know, we can take it further than that too, and because we really can be part of this country. There is something about, you know, Aboriginal ways of knowing and being that is simply human. It's not to do with race or you know, where you come from. It's a it's a it's a it's a it's a it's a perception. It's a worldview that is available to everyone, and it offers an enormous amount for the Western world, which has been so narrow and blinkered, you know, over the last, you know, couple of centuries in developing them, you know, the culture the way it has. Now, there's been some fantastic, you know, astounding technological developments on account of that, but there's been at a cost as well, and the opportunity to learn from, you know, a narrative, a holistic, an intuitive, you know, way of seeing the world, you know, is actually something of an answer to some of the problems and excesses that have been caused by the one sort of narrow path that the Western world has brought about over the last few centuries. And you know, it's my firm view that what we're doing here is not trivial at all, but has, you know, profound ramifications. Hello, Max. Max says, I recently appreciated hearing some wording in an acknowledgement recently, which included elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledging any Aboriginal people present. This reflected ongoing and current and future presence. Thanks, Max. I hope you don't mind me reading these comments. It actually just helps me concentrate on what's being said here. Carol says advanced, most especially in areas of operating not only on the five senses but sixth sense attunement and the capacity to conduct energies that are out of the reach of Western consciousness, as with Ngangri traditional healers. Absolutely. You know, there's the most profound experience I have of living in country in a traditional setting is one of being in the flow. And it is much more embracing than living in the flow where we sort of get on a roll with something and can, you know, feel that everything's going really well. It is that, but much more. And I've no doubt it's connected with having other ways, you know, it's connected with the worldview of not trying to manage and control and order and plan so much, as also being open to intuition and you know, other senses that we're probably not using very much in city life at all. Well, thank you everyone for your contributions. Advanced, all-inclusive, harmonious, connected, grounded, attached. Yes, it's spiritual as well, self-sufficient connectedness. Thank you. So if you, John, let me just throw it back to you for before we start to close off and talk about next week. Is there anything that you wanted to sum up in about our conversation today?
Oh no, it's this is the first time actually that this has been presented in this way. It's normally done with people sitting on the ground on the booble and in a circle, and it's about how we can begin and involve ourselves in a constructive conversation where everything is on the table, and then how we put our minds and our hearts together in looking at these issues in relation to into our issues in relation to First Nations peoples. Yeah, and so it's a real honour to be able to do this for the first time here, albeit I know the flow of direct interaction is not there, and that could be a good thing in some respects. But I think we can at least still begin the conversation in a good way, and see how it grows, and see where we end up by the end of the presentations as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, look, thank you very much, John. It is a very interesting and challenging experiment that we're taking on here. And thanks to everyone who's participating here. I've just a little bit of feedback, I guess, is that I find your comments and reading your comments really takes me into the conversation, and I'm sure that if I was trying to find my way without that, I could find it quite difficult. So thank you very much for that. It's really appreciated, and it's your participation that actually will make this form of delivery work, I've no doubt. So next week we're going on to the second of the boards, and it's called White Clouds Upon the Water. I'm not going to say any more about it than that at this stage, but just to invite you, same time, same channel, as they say, to join us for the second episode of Kuku Yaral, The Fires of Our Ancestors Are Burning, entitled White Clouds Upon the Water. So Dave and Maggie say, love your work, John. And
thank you.
And say nice words through Carol as well. So fabulous, John. Big shout out to David Salomon for the work he puts in. Thank you. Matt, g'day, Matt. Even us Brits have our chukupa if we just sense it. Love and peace to all. Absolutely spot on, Matt. You know, these ways of knowing and being are age old. You know, they were the first that the first consciousness, you know, was formed in that way. So thank you, everyone. We're 10 past the hour. It's been a great hour spent with you. I really appreciate your presence, your company, your words, and thanks once again, John. I'll just put you up on the screen for a sec before we sign off for the night.
Thank you all for participating, and I look forward to next week.
Thanks, John, and likewise. And I look forward to seeing everyone next week, and and making this journey through the storyboards together. So have a good week. Blessings to everyone, and we'll see you next Sunday at 7. Cheerio.